me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I feel yeah, for the Zoom, for the audience on the Zoom, so here here we are still on the first slide. So yeah, this process from cis retinal to the pent retinal, this photochemical reaction happens within 200 femtoseconds. And to give you a sense how fast that is, one femtosecond to a second is like a second to 32 million years. So you can imagine how fast it is. It's an ultra fast process. And later I will explain how we can investigate this kind of ultra fast processes by another molecular system. So now we know photochemistry is the study of the molecular behavior happening after the molecule absorbs the light. And the part of light ranges from the visible light to the UV light. Actually, the photochemistry extends far beyond the previous example gave the vision perception process. It plays a key role in many natural and technological processes. Like here, it is critical in ozone cycle, protecting us from the UV radiation. And also it helps us understand how the UV causes this DNA damages and helps study the pathology and therapeutics for diseases. And it's also, in addition, it also contributes to the development of the optoelectronic devices like solar cells, LEDs. Overall, by studying photochemistry, we can understand the light-matter interaction, and we can improve the energy efficiency, which is hot topics around the world now. And also we can advance our fundamental sciences. Transition metal complexes are usually explored for photochemistry because they're partially filled d orbitals. For those of you who learned chemistry several years before, don't worry. It just means that there are more possible behaviors of electrons surrounding the nucleus. And it allows a range of electronic states and the coordination geometries that's different exhibit the different physical properties. And many many transition metal complexes can absorb light, visible light, because there are electronic transitions between different states. And also the ways of relaxation can vary and be complicated to study. On this periodic table, there are 38 transition metals. And today we are going to study is a chromium element. It has a relatively simple electronic structure, and it's an archetypal element for studying the photochemistry. And the molecule, the chromium coordination complex we're going to study is called chromium acac. It is an octahedral coordination complex with a chromium 3 ion chelated by 3 ligands. There are different oxidation states of chromium, and +3 is the most stable one. In chromium 3, there are 3 electrons in 5 d orbitals, and each electronic configuration is a different electronic state. Like here's this is A2G ground state with 3 electrons occupying the lowest d orbitals, and those two T2G and EG are excited states. T2G is the doublet state with 3 net spins, and the EG is T2G is a quartet state with 3 net spins, and EG is a doublet state with 1 spin flipped over. And the process called intersystem crossing from the T2G state to the EG state, it happens within less than 100 femtoseconds, and it is driven by the vibrational couplings and spin-orbit couplings. I will explain later on. So we care about photochemistry, right? And we want to study the photochemical process, the happening process of the molecule after the light absorption. So we want to study actually the dynamics. Experimentally, scientists can study this photoreaction process by pump probe spectroscopy. I like to take the basketball bouncing basketball example here. The pump pulse is like the force that makes the basketball bounce, like you throw away the basketball. And the energy of the pump should be at a specific wavelength, which is here corresponding to the energy gap between the ground state and excited state, so that the electron is promoted from the ground state to the excited state by the pump pulse. And the probe pulses are like the pictures you're taking during the bouncing process of this bouncing motion. And so the probe pulses comes up and to measure the state of the system. So that the experimentalists, they can get a spectrum to describe the status of the dynamics process. Actually, the Professor McCarter research group, they did the pump probe experiment in their study of chromium X-ray, and they probed the T2G excited state of the T2G excited state dynamics of the chromium X-ray, and found out this vibrational coherence. So the x-axis is the time in the unit of femtosecond, and the y-axis is the relative absorbance. To visualize the mechanism behind this signal, here's the animation. Here's the animation. So suppose we have 3 molecules in the sample in the beaker, and initially their vibration motion are synchronized, and suddenly and they change the speed of the vibration, so that causing this synchronization or the vibration coherence disappears as the time goes on. But their initial synchronized motion is the reason why this vibration coherence appears on the spectrum. And this vibration coherence appears after 200 femtoseconds. So the intersystem crossing process happens within 100 femtoseconds. So it means that the vibration coherence persists when the intersystem crossing happens. And this might be an influence factor for intersystem crossing. So here's the potential energy surface, the qualitatively described potential energy surface for the chromium X-ray. Initially the molecule is at the ground state. After the light injection, then it is promoted to the higher T2G state. While it is oscillating on the T2G state, it suddenly finds a channel that leading to the low doublet state, and finally relaxing to the ground state. So we came up with some motivations. First, is it possible to control this ultra-fast intersystem crossing upon excitation to harvest energy efficiently? And secondly, how do we identify reaction coordinates for this process through our dynamic simulation? The reaction coordinates is influence factors that can change the rate of intersystem crossing. But there are some challenges to resolve the excited state dynamics. For any simulation with any theoretic method, it's just an approximation of the real molecule and its environment. So the accuracy of the result is really up to the level of approximation. And secondly, the partially filled d orbitals resulting in non-trivial electron correlation. The electron correlation means that the electron is not isolated from other particles. It exists in the electrostatic field created by other electrons. So it can feel the forces created by other particles. So in this case, it requires a multi-reference method like CASCF, CAS, PT2, MRCS, and those methods usually are computationally demanding for larger molecular systems. And also, in addition, the need for modeling spin-orbit couplings to deal with relativistic effects also adds more computation complexity to our study. And so later there are balance between the accuracy and later I will talk about method and the balance between accuracy and the computation cost. Our group adopted GPU accelerated computing. We know that graphics processing unit can handle tasks in parallel. It can like the data parallelism, performing the same operation on multiple data, or task parallelism, like performing different operations on different sets of data. We use the high performance computing cluster CWolf, and combined with our quantum chemistry package called TerraChem, so our calculation compared to CPU-based calculations, the calculations is speed up by like 1 to 2 order of magnitude by using GPUs. First, this is our study molecular system. It has 43 atoms and 183 electrons, and one electron has 3 degrees of freedom. So total there will be hundreds of degrees of freedom for the system, which can be really expensive and high computational cost. So we want to do modification on the ligands. So we substitute methyl groups with hydrogens, and then here comes our molecular system study model, the chromium PD03. It has 25 atoms and 135 electrons, so the computation cost can be slightly decreased. But firstly, we want to make some comparison between those two molecular systems. So we did the geometry optimization for 3 states, A2G, EG, T2G state, with chromium acac3 and chromium PD03, using the state average KCF, 3 electrons in 5 active orbitals with a basis at level 2DZ. And for the ground state, we see that they almost, and we investigated, actually, we calculated the ligand metal bond distances, the chromium oxygen bond length. And at the ground state, we find the bond lengths are almost 1.98. And it's quite a symmetric geometry, and similar geometry exhibited at the EG state. But at the T2G excited state, we can see that 2 chromium oxygen bonds, they are contracted, and 4 chromium oxygen bonds, they are elongated. This is known as the Jahn-Teller effect or Jahn-Teller distortion. So Jahn-Teller distortion usually occurs on the excited state for octahedral geometry. It will show some distortion of the geometry for the octahedron. And for the chromium PD03 molecule, we can see that ground state, the geometry at ground state is quite symmetric, and the similar geometry as the EG state. Also at the T2G state, there is Jahn-Teller distortion. So later on, we can conduct the calculations, dynamic calculation on the PD03 molecule, and to reduce the computation cost a lot. So as I said, there are 2 ways to investigate dynamics, excited state dynamics. As I said, I introduced the experimental way is to conduct a pump probe experiment. Our group excels at molecular dynamics. So we use ab initio adiabatic molecular dynamics. I want to make an analogy like it's like a film. At different time step, we get different configurations, and each time step is like a snapshot. And if we get that snapshot, and later on we can calculate the bond length, energies, non-adiabatic couplings, and different parameters we want to calculate. So we run the ab initio molecular dynamics. The electronic structure method is the same as the previous geometry optimized method, CASSF. And this schematic diagram here shows how the dynamics work. So we run 50 trajectories, And at each time step, we can get 50 excited state configurations. And the total simulation time is 600 femtoseconds, which is long enough to incorporate dynamics to happen. And ab initio, adiabatic magnetic dynamics, it calculates the nuclear dynamics and electronic structure simultaneously. And it's worth noting that here we stick the wave packets on the T2G excited state without responding to other electronic states. The initial conditions of the trajectories are sampled from Wigner distribution, including the information of position and momentum. And then we get some results from our dynamics study. The 6 chromium oxygen bonds, they are indistinguishable due to the symmetry nature of the octahedral structure. So we sorted bond lengths and average at each point we average over 50 trajectories. And the x-axis is the time and y-axis is the chromium oxygen bond length. So we can see the oscillatory signal for those chromium oxygen bonds. There's an oscillation of the bond length. So to visualize it, we did the fast Fourier transform to transfer the signal into the frequency domain, and we get 2 frequencies. One is 228 wave numbers, and the other one is the 456 wave numbers. The experimentalists they also did the analysis on their absorption spectrum, and they find the 2 frequencies are 193 wave numbers and 458 wave numbers. And our result is really in good agreement with the experimental results, and we predict the vibration frequencies during the dynamics pretty well. And then we separated the chromium oxygen stretching mode into symmetric stretching mode and asymmetric stretching mode. For the symmetric stretching mode, the 6 chromium oxygen bond lengths, they are average. And we get the shaded colors is the standard deviation. For the symmetric stretching mode, it's about 0.02, and it's quite coherent. It's quite coherent vibration and has the oscillation periods of 146 femtoseconds and 73 femtoseconds. For the asymmetric stretching mode, it has a large standard deviation 0, which is 5 times bigger than the symmetric stretching mode. And this means that different asymmetric stretching modes are canceling out during the dynamics. And then we explore the Jahn-Teller effect on the excited state. So Jahn-Teller effect are evaluated by whether 2 shortest chromium oxygen bonds are opposite each other. If they are opposite each other, we assign 1 to those trajectory, and if they are not opposite each other, it's 0, and it means they are perpendicular to each other. And the average, if it's a perfectly symmetric octahedral structure, the average value should be 0.2, as it should 1/5, right? 5 other bonds, right? And we find from this graph, we find that Jahn-Teller effect is especially obvious around 50 femtoseconds, and after 100 femtoseconds, the probability oscillates around 0.4, and means that it's still higher than the average values, means that the Jahn-Teller effect actually maintains on the T2G excited state. And then we investigate the spin-off couplings. The transition rate from the initial state to the final state is determined by Fermi's golden rule, which is equation here, and it's a rate that's proportional to some square value. So here we plotted the square of the coupling, and the blue line represents the T2. The blue line and black line, they are both T2G states, but they with a different z direction spin, 0.5 and 1.5. We can see that spin-off coupling squares, they're almost consistent throughout the simulation. And so the spin-off couplings are not subject to the vibrational modes or the geometrical variations, but they are big enough to make the intersystem crossing process happen. And then we investigate the dynamics of the excited state energies. The energies, this is the y-axis is the energy of different states. The blue line represents the T2G state, and the orange line here, and also a slightly the yellow line represents the energies of PG state to degenerate PG states. And we can see that the energy as the T2G state does not vary greatly through the simulation time, but the energy of the TEG state changes, and this oscillatory signal is corresponding to the symmetric stretching mode with the same oscillation period, 146 femtoseconds. And in addition, at some time step, we can see the zero energy gap, the two energy levels of the two energy levels between the T2G and EG states, they are intersecting with each other. Those zero energy gap, the smaller energy gap will usually lead to the intersystem crossing, because the intersystem crossing is more likely to be driven by the vibrational coupling between the different electronic states. And the experimental group, they replace the methyl groups with tetrabutyl groups. And those tetrabutyl groups, they are much bulkier and heavier than the methyl groups. So they found that by this substitution, the rate of intersystem crossing is decreased by more than an order of magnitude. It's actually because this bulkier group on the ligands actually can limit the vibrational modes of the molecule, the metal ligand stretching mode. So our result, the result we get here is actually can confirm their idea and predict that their idea also very good. So in conclusion, Chromium acac is a challenging molecular system to study on photochemical dynamics after the light excitation. And we found a Chromium PDO3 a molecular study model as an alternative for study this dynamics process, and it exhibits similar ground state and excited state configurations. And then we separate the stretching mode into symmetric and asymmetric stretching mode and find some coherent and incoherent behavior of different stretching modes. And also the Jahn-Teller effect always persists on the T2G excited state. And also the spin-opening coupling, which is the influence factor for driving the intersystem crossing to happen. It's almost consistent during the excited state dynamics, but it just do not change corresponding to the vibration mode. But it's still big enough to drive the intersystem crossing happen. And the variations of EG state energy, we see that synchronize the oscillatory signal, and so it synchronizes with the symmetric stretching mode, verifying that ligand modification can actually modulate the rate of intersystem crossing. And finally, I will thanks my research PI. Professor Ben Levine, and notably, I will thank my mentor Asha Mahmood helped a lot with this project, and the founding agency, and for CWolf and Access for providing computation time. And thank you all.
All right, questions. Yes.
Yeah, I have a few questions, starting from a very basic one. You mentioned in the beginning that part of the goal of this is to be able to harvest energy from these photochemical reactions. And so when you're studying these different states, the ground state, the excited state, is the idea that the energy being harvested because as it moves from state to state, electrons are being released or something, and that they can then flow to get picked up in some kind of current? How does the photochemical process relate to harvesting energy?
The energy is relaxation is called down-radiative decay. Like if it relaxes from the higher energy state to the low energy state, then it releases the energy as a heat.
it releases it as heat. So
Yeah.
not as the electrons going free, but actually heat is released.
Yes, it's from the reaction process. There actually only in this molecule, but actually in other molecules, there are also other ways to release those energy, like fluorescence by radiative decay, like fluorescence or phosphorescence. But in this case, it's just the heat.
Okay, thank you. So then on slide 16, if you go to slide 16, I had a question. So your predictions are, match very well, but I noticed that the second frequency peak is sort of much closer to what they measured than the first frequency peak, which seems a little bit, further away. So I was wondering what the variation is like, and if that 193 number is sort of within a standard deviation of the predicted one.
Yeah. Actually, we calculate the resolution, the resolution of the frequency after fast Fourier transform. I think I can't remember exactly. It's like within some range. The value is within like plus minus some range.
Right.
So I think it's still very close to this one. It's like plus minus. I can't remember. Sorry, I can't remember the.
Okay,
the
it's a few tens of wave numbers, so it's within the resolution.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then my last question has to do at the very end in your conclusions, because you're comparing. You began by talking about the chromium molecule 3, the ACAC1-3, which is sort of, I guess, too big and complex to simulate, with the computational resources we have. And so that's why you chose this alternative one. But my understanding was that you're actually interested in what the behavior of chromium 3.
Yeah.
And so given what you've learned about this other one, what do you predict or expect? Given what you've learned about the behavior of the one that you've studied, or the one you've simulated, what do you expect to be the case for the behavior of chromium 3?
Yeah, actually, we just studied this, taking this as a study model, and actually it's basically like a representative for all the. I feel it's like, but later on we will like if we can tolerate the computation cost later on, we probably will run dynamics on Chromium acac3. But I feel the Chromium PDO3 it's like for the representative study model for the different Chromium 3 this octahedral accumulated by 3 links, all the like you said, it's the structure for the Chromium 3.
So since the structure is basically the same, you're expecting it to behave the same way.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
One thing that's interesting sort of long term is our collaborators can put different ligands on that can actually separate the electron out from the chromium and hold it there longer to where someone can do something useful with it. And we can't, and this is a step towards being able to simulate something one step more complicated like that. Other questions?
Yeah, I'm interested in the computational challenge. You said that you're looking at the chromium POD because it's smaller, right? The number of atoms and electrons didn't seem that much smaller. So what in terms of computational complexity, what are we talking about, and how much more would you need to be actually able to work on the chromium ACAC?
Oh, you mean how much we need to what else we need to do accelerate calculations?
Right.
Yeah, we adopted GPU acceleration calculation reactors, the electronic structure calculation, the different integrals, energies, gradient. Those are already be accelerated by GPU implementation. And what else we can do? I think it's for the dynamics, there's also the TCPB, the paracam sort of buffers, like you also another way to accelerate the aim simulation, the dynamic simulation, and yeah, since my project is more application, not like coding development for the calculation acceleration, so Yeah.
But one, part of the question is, what's the, if he's asking, we're only adding 6 more carbon atoms, right? So it's
Yeah.
not that many more electrons. How does the calculation scale though with the addition of more electrons? How much more expensive does it get?
Oh, yeah, I think it depends on the degrees of freedom it scales with the degrees of freedom of number. Like here's if you add 1 more electron, you will probably add 3 more degrees of freedom. So it scales with the size of the molecule.
Does it scale linearly though, or does it scale?
I think it depends on your observable, the result you want to get, the energies, the gradients. If you like the complexity, probably is yeah, because you need to incorporate more basis functions to describe each molecule. So I think this complexity cube, I'm not sure.
You're close. It's like naively it's n to the 4th, but then we make approximations that make it better than that. But it's messy to assign an exact exponent. But yeah, so it's pretty bad if we add 50% more electrons like here, or 30% more quadruples of the time or something like that. Yeah.
I was wondering how much more computational resources you would need to.
Oh, we could, acac I think would be doable today, probably. But you run at the end of the 4th, you run into that wall pretty hard at some point. Yeah, I think the sort of charge transfer things you would be interested in doing longer term are much bigger than these, and it would be, yeah. We could probably do it, but it's expensive. Yeah.
Sure, but I mean, their systems are significantly bigger than SQL.
Oh, yeah. One thing, we don't parallelize across GPUs very well, so it's single GPU calculations right now. Actually, Jim Zhao and I are writing a proposal, actually, hopefully today submitting a proposal, fingers crossed, and I wanted to think about it for a while, but to do sort of larger scale calculations of this type using, like extreme scale hardware. But right now it's 1 GPU at a time, yeah.
So, could you show the slide that you talked about coherent, the coherent field system? I think that after this, the coherent excitation. Yeah. No, just after this, the experimental comparison. It's another. I think it's about
The results part of the.
Yeah. The one the Gaskell group, I think that. No,
This one?
yeah, so, no, there was one more, like, the how the excitation affects multiple atoms at the same time. The vibrational coherence, you said, right?
Oh, I see.
What does that mean?
Here's
Yeah,
the vibration coherence, right?
And what is being measured on that? What are each of those points showing?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah, I spent a lot of time understand. Yeah, this like suppose initially suppose this is the actually we can imagine the vibration modes of different molecules. It also it's vibrating on the T2G excited state, and there's actually this spectrum absorption spectrum experiment measure the absorption. The absorption means that the energy gap between the current state and the ground state energy. So when the molecule is vibrating, right, and then it means that it's vibrating on the potential energy surface. It's not like a fixed value at the potential energy surface here, like from here to here, but otherwise it's like oscillating on the potential so that the energy gap actually can change. So and many molecules the oscillation are synchronized, and this experiment is a statistical measurement, right? If many molecules they oscillate synchronized, they oscillate together, and so that we can actually the absorption can also so that the absorption vibrates. So we can see this oscillatory signal on the spectrum.
So each of those points is one measurement.
yeah, no, the point here is a oh yeah, the point here is a measurement, and the black line here is a feeding.
So you can see this behavior because you quite spread over many different measurements, you do actually match the behavior you expect.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, well, thank you, everybody. That's all. Thank you. Everyone grab some cookies and Doritos on the way out. Yeah, great job.